We're excited to kick off our podcast series, Good Takes. We are going to dive into some of our favorite books, movies, and more, and really just going to discuss together some of the larger themes, the moments that really stood out to us, and in some cases where it's applicable, the differences between the book and the movie version of a story, whether good or bad. My name's Katie.
And I'm Sam. And Katie and I are siblings. And so we often have these conversations about stories that we love. So I live now far away from Katie. So we thought that, this would be a great medium to just kind of share the conversations that we're going to be having anyways. So we're starting off with The Lord of the Rings, which is only fair because it's something that Katie and I grew up mainly watching, but also reading in our later years. And it's something that we've both come to love. It's something that the whole family enjoys, and we're nerds. So
The
yeah,
obsession runs deep.
exactly.
Okay,
But
so
so
cool.
so we'll start with just fellowship, I assume, and see what we can get through here.
Yeah, and
Um,
I don't think we're even going to get through all of Fellowship in just one, podcast session. There's so much to talk about. We both recently read the books again, and of course, the movies are an annual rite of passage. So content is super fresh. So yeah, let's just dive in and see how far we get in our first take.
Agreed. Well, I guess what's your favorite part of Fellowship of the Ring? I think that's a good place to start.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, it differs between book and movie, obviously, because for me, the Boromir death in Lord of the Rings, and probably should have noted at the front,
Yeah.
obvious spoilers. So if you haven't watched Lord of the Rings or read the books, you should get out of here because we're going to dive deep. But yeah, Boromir's death in the movie is absolutely one of my favorite parts. They took the little ones, absolutely
Such a cool song.
crushing. And yeah, it's funny because you don't actually get the reveal of Boromir's death until you're into Two Towers for the books. So it does not apply to the books themselves, but it is my favorite part of the movies for sure. When it comes to the books, oh my God. There's so many different areas that are just so captivating, and the descriptions that Tolkien uses to really make you immersed in the space. I'd say probably the Moria chapter
Mm.
is my favorite part of the book. What about you?
No, I hate to say it, but I also think for the books anyways, I think Moria is also my favorite because I think it gives you the best sense. One thing that the books do better than the movies, though the movies do it very well, is like the sense of time and like how much time has passed and
Yeah.
how this story is taking place in not in like a fallen world essentially, or a world that is far removed from its history. And Moria, you get the best sense of that. Like they don't it's not like you don't get the description of like these like great, halls and whatnot, but it has like this decaying feel and what is it called? The Dwelf? I don't know, like when they enter the room before
Bird House,
Balin's.
yeah.
So I really like it. It gives it like an eerie feeling, and it feels like the pressure's on because even though the Nazgul chase the hobbits out of the Shire, up until Caradhras and Moria, you don't really get the idea. Like I think that's the first time you see orcs. Uh,
Yeah,
in, um,
Moria.
so it just kind of puts it more in a larger context. But I like Gandalf and fighting the Balrog, obviously. It might also be my favorite in the movies. Boromir's death is incredible. Probably one of the greatest character moments in all the movies. But I think Moria for both
Yeah.
in the movies and the books.
No, that's fair. Well, Sean Bean just knows how to die on screen, and he
Yeah,
just does it
exactly.
phenomenally. Absolute stud. No, it's a really fair point. It is true that Tolkien is so conscious of the time. But you made an interesting point because the gravity of the situation isn't really known to the readers, or I think to even the hobbits, until you start to see some of that darkness in Moria. And we've talked about this before, but there is this moment that Tolkien wrote so beautifully, but that Peter Jackson really brought to life in the movies, and that is when Frodo says, I wish none of this had ever happened. I really wish I wasn't the one who was bearing the ring. And so in the books, he says that in his little hobbit hole when Gandalf has returned. So this is well after, Bilbo's left the Shire, he's left the ring in Frodo's care. Gandalf returns, and in a movie you've got to go 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 go, but in the books it's years. And when Gandalf comes back and he's explaining the ring and the Dark Lord. That is when Frodo says in the books, I wish this had never happened. And Gandalf has that epic line, so do all who live to see such times. But it's not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And again, we've talked about this one-on-one so many times before, but for Peter Jackson to make the decision to have that conversation happen in Moria just feels more applicable, because in the books, when Frodo is still safe in his hobbit hole, the gravity of the situation is so unclear at this point. But in Moria, it's finally starting to hit, like, wow, we might not make it out of this. This is so much bigger than just us. And it just makes that moment so powerful, like one of the most powerful moments or scenes in the movies for sure.
No, agreed. And it's maybe controversial, but I know we agree, at least for certain elements. But there are just some moments that the movies just do better, and that just carry more emotional weight. Because you're right, like in the start, you need that for like the context dump, and it's important to have. But again, like, yeah, you just don't feel the humanity behind it. And then like a similar moment is, I mean, Boromir's death for sure, but also like when Sam is running out as Frodo is leaving at the falls.
It's like said that as my favorite
it almost
scene.
happens. Yeah, it almost happens exactly the same in the books. Like I think Sam almost, it's you're a little more recent on Fellowship, but I'm pretty sure Sam also begins to drown, or like he's wading in the water.
His head goes under, and immediately Frodo's like,
it
no,
just has
I'm not
more
letting
of an
that
emotional.
happen.
Yeah, he grabs him by the head or something, like his hair is like curly hobbit hair or something. Yeah, exactly. So I agree. Like there's the movies, like the music by Howard Shore obviously is a main reason as to why this is, but they often pack more of an emotional punch. Like there's not a distance, but everyone's a little more cool-headed in the books.
Yeah. Could be a couple of different things. Like, first of all, the medium. I mean, when you have a movie and you're able to put a soundtrack behind it, it just makes it so much more powerful. I mean, when the music, Sam is drowning in the movies and the music swells as Frodo's hand plunges into the water and they clasp. Like, sometimes I just listen to the soundtrack when I'm trying to get, work done, or just it's a slow day and I'm really needing an emotional moment. And I might not even be paying much attention, but I will hear that kind of swell in the music and immediately know, oh my God, Frodo's just saved Sam from the water. It's beautiful.
You can trace the film. Like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, putting on the soundtrack, the moments, and you like the lines will play in your head, because The Lord of the Rings is so interesting, where it's one of those things where even fans that wouldn't consider themselves like very much into the fandom, it's still something people don't just watch once. Like everyone also, it's like the extended editions, maybe it's just a bubble I exist in, but they seem to be just the de facto anyways. Like even people that it's like their first viewing of The Lord of the Rings, they didn't grow up with it, they're still always encouraged by someone to watch the extended edition and not the theatrical. And so many people have like yearly watches, and they have no interest in reading the books. They never want to read the books, or they don't have the time. But it's so interesting. I don't know, because like Harry Potter would probably be the modern equivalent, but even that, like, it doesn't seem like it has the repetitive, I don't know, annual ritual.
Don't piss off the Harry Potter fandom, because as a huge Harry Potter fan, we rewatch all the time. It is the Christmas epic. But I totally hear what you're saying. It has the rewatch ability, Lord of the Rings does, in terms of it being this absolute epic journey. And it also feels, and again, I don't want to piss off Harry Potter fans. I love Harry Potter desperately. We'll get into that eventually. But if you start Fellowship of the Rings, you are finishing that trilogy. You're not going to stop there. Whereas sometimes I might just put on, one of my favorite Harry Potter movies, Prisoner of Azkaban, and kind of leave it at that. But with Lord of the Rings, if you start the journey, you have to finish it. And it's interesting because, like you said, we both might live in our nerdy little bubble where we're like, no, extended edition is the only way to go. You start it, you can't stop it. It would be interesting to know if people who just have a like preliminary experience where they, don't necessarily get as deep into the content as we might. It'd be interesting to know if they feel like once you start it, you have to finish, or extended version or nothing. But, the extended versions obviously bring in so much more of the story that if you really get sucked into the fandom and you're, wanting to know more, then even if you started with the theatrical version, you will eventually go back and watch extended for sure. And I haven't seen theatrical I guess since they were in theaters. because why even bother? Like I see them on Amazon Prime or on these streaming services. And even though I'm tempted to just put it on, I'm like, I actually can't. I have to watch it extended. And so
No,
usually I have to
you
wait till
can't
we're
go
home.
back. Like, no, like you have not seen them since like the mid 2000s. But no, I wouldn't want to watch it, especially in the later ones. Like Fellowship is great. I love all the added scenes. I mean, now at this point, it's actually hard to differentiate between the two versions. But I feel like it becomes more and more important as the movies go on. Like you don't see Saruman. That seems like the biggest one. Like there's a lot of little character moments that I love, but there like some plot elements. But anyways, I guess we should focus on Fellowship regardless. I guess I mean some of the looking at some of the differences between the books and the movies. The first one, the biggest one in my mind that jumps out is Tom Bombadil. I mean,
I knew you were going to bring him up. You're obsessed.
yeah, I mean, come on. Hey, Dole, Mary Dole. I love how he speaks. I love that whole section of the books. I get why they cut it out. I think it's very understandable. It doesn't really do anything to the narrative, but I don't know. It really is. It feels like it's also like if the Shire is in a vacuum to Middle Earth, it's like Tom Bombadil's little realm, I guess, is just like even further in. But it's I don't know. It's really special. I can't explain it. It's like nothing else in the books.
There's an element of magic to it that comes through in other ways, like Lothlorien, which we can get into, as a separate aside. But I agree with you. It's such a magical moment. And the description of it is, I think, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure Peter Jackson's actually spoken about why he didn't include Tom Bombadil and said there was no way on screen to capture the magic and the essence and the otherworldly presence that is Tom Bombadil without doing it a disservice. So, why even attempt to put that on screen when it's been done so beautifully in the books? And I mean, to your point, I'm sure a lot of hard decisions were made in terms of what to leave on the cutting board because the extended version is 3.5 hours, maybe. And some decisions just had to be made to not include in the movies if it wasn't going to further the plot. But yeah, Tom Bombadil and Goldberry. Oh my God, that was a faux pas on my end. But yeah, Goldberry. I mean, it is a really beautiful chapter. And, when I was a kid, I used to always feel like those chapters took so long to get through and I just wanted to get to the meat of it. But I reread them like a month ago and it does actually fly by and you're really immersed in it. And the old forest, just every element of where Tom Bombadil lives has this ancient magic to it that I think would be really hard to replicate.
Yeah, no, it's some of the best. And like to your point about Peter Jackson, I think you're right because I don't know if that's what he mentioned specifically, but it's at some point Frodo gives Tom the ring. And it's like you're trying to build up all of this suspense around the ring and its danger. And then you just have this being that can like wear it and flip it on his finger.
And I don't think he disappears. He does not disappear when he wears the ring.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't even realize like what it is. Like I remember there's a scene where Frodo, for whatever reason, tries to pull a trick and he puts the ring on and he's like sneaking around to the door and Tom can see him. Yeah. And he's like, your hand is much more beautiful without that thing on it or whatever. Yeah. I love the character. And so, yeah, like it's better served not in the movies, but I think that's still an important part of the books because one, like Tolkien, obviously very much obsessed with nature. He's, obviously Middle Earth is a very important, if not the most important character in the story.
True.
Tom is just kind of like a personification of that. I know there's a theory, I don't know if it's a prevailing theory, but that like he's the embodiment of Eru Ilúvatar, like God. But I don't think that's the case. I think he's just an essence of the world. I mean, there's 1,000 theories into it, and I know Tolkien's written letters about Tom, but it captures that magic of Lord of the Rings, like in that one character. That's really hard to describe, but it's like this ancient connection to a larger telling that I think is just it's like a theme that runs through the whole narrative.
Well, and to your point, I mean, if we're seeing Middle Earth as a character, Tom is so immersed in the nature of it. He is like a connection through to the nature of Middle Earth that is personified in a weird way. But you're right. I mean, there would just be so many potential plot holes that would then have to be explained in the movie. Like, why wouldn't we just give the ring to Tom? Although they mention that at the council. And Gandalf has, and I don't know the exact quote, but he very succinctly explains like Tom would be the worst keeper because he wouldn't even understand it. Like he's not going to leave his realm. The old forest he's essentially god of this area, of this old forest. And like maybe god isn't the right word, but keeper at the very least. Yeah, master, that's right.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because again, Gandalf says like he would just like lose it. Like over time, he wouldn't give it any mind. He wouldn't. So no, and I think I think it was important that Tolkien throws that in there because it begs the question. Like he knows that he has to explain away Tom, but he also thinks that Tom is important enough that he has to also remain in the story. You know, like Tolkien absolutely knew that he was kind of digging a plot hole, so to speak, but he felt the need to keep it in there, which I think says a lot to the character. But I love the whole Old Forest aspect. It's like a mini Fangorn, but it's like as soon as they leave the borders of the Shire, you realize that the world is so much bigger. It's literally like the gate that they go through outside of where is it? Like near Brandy Hall. I forget the name where they leave the Shire.
No, but that's exactly it. Where Merry Brandybuck and where they all lived, you know, the outskirts of the Shire, which is even kind of seemed as Buckland. Yeah, the borders. And that's another thing that I really loved in the movies, even if it, you know, had the potential to come off a little cheesy. They don't ever, that I recall in the books, explain the feeling among the hobbits when they actually pass the borders of their land into a new land. But that moment in the movies when Sam stops dead in the corn stalks and is like, this is it. If I take one more step, I'll be the furthest from home I've ever been. It again just speaks to moment. This bubble. Oh my God. I mean, Sam, you know, we're going to have to do a whole separate one on just characters and how they are so epic. But Samwise Gamgee is just incredible. 10 out of 10. No, arguably one of the best characters.
No, I absolutely agreed. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's quite different in the movies than in the books. Not so much in his heart, but more so. There's more of I mean, you and I have spoken about this in private, but there is more of a master-servant relationship in the books.
Yeah.
Though I mean, I think that's like the proper term, but that's also not how, when I read it, that's not how I see it, so to speak. But in the movies, it is more of just like a love, like the love is there in the books, but it's more of a regular friendship, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. It's more of a friendship that was built on being friends, versus, you know, the like Sam is identified as an employee of Frodo's and initially of Bilbo's through the old gaffer as the gardener. And yeah, it's mentioned Sam's the gardener. But you're right. I prefer how the movies did that and really focused on the friendship side of things. Also, though, as you get through the book, those lines become super blurred and it is less of Sam, you know, tending to everything while the rest of the hobbits sit around. That's only really in the first couple of chapters. And then it kind of moves beyond that too. So it's kind of interesting because in the books, you see the friendship arguably develop a little bit more from what it was at first and to how this, you know, journey brought them only that much closer, which yes, it brings them closer in the movies too. But yeah, Sam is certainly different. I mean, and you said it earlier, but arguably all of the characters are a little more cold in the books than they come across in the movies. And it could be a couple of things. Like, again, the medium, it's when you're reading a book, a lot of it is up to interpretation, or it's really hard to get across moments that might be a moment of connection, like even just eye contact or, you know, an embrace or something like that. Yeah. But yeah, there is definitely that coldness. And then that actually makes me think of Aragorn because, oh my God, he's so different in the books and the movie. Out of all of the Fellowship characters, I mean, we can talk about Gimli in a minute, but he is very, very different. And not just in how he acts and who he is, you know, but his character arc is just totally like he's ready to be king. There's just no conversation of like, I don't want it. He's not Jon Snowing this thing at all. Like he's like, I'm in, I'm ready. He gets Anduril right away. Like it's
I think when they meet him in Bree, I think he has the shards of Narsil. I think
that's
the sword that he has. It's like because they note he's like a notched sword or like a half sword or something. A big difference. And they serve their own, it serves its own purpose. I think that there are strengths and weaknesses to both of the arcs. I do have a preference, I think, but to a point towards the book is it makes it makes his sacrifice or like the care he has for the hobbits and the company in general, I think it actually makes it more powerful because by accepting
Yeah.
the weight of like his birthright, so to speak, but to still like when they're deciding when they're going down the Anduin, and he's like, my heart says like go with Boromir to Gondor, but he's like, I can't leave Frodo. And like there's a right before the book ends, he's like, if I were to truly choose, it would be me, Legolas, and Gimli going with Frodo to Mordor. And so I think it makes it a little more impactful for like when he's helping the lower folk. I mean, we can get in the Two Towers, I think it actually becomes a little more clear when they're
Yeah.
hunting Merry and Pippin. But just in terms of fellowship, um, yeah, like I like the arc of the reluctant king in the movies. I think it's better served in the films. I think there's something that's very appealing about like a humble kind of coming to your sense of duty. But I don't know. Like, what do you think? Do you have a preference?
Well, I think you're right. The medium is what I'm just, my heart leans towards the movies because it was my first exposure to all of it. Like I didn't read
Yeah,
the books until after I'd watched the movies, which, could be a point of contention for some true fans of the
yeah, but I
book.
think most people at this age, at least our age, like,
I mean, the movies came out when I was like 10 years old. So
yeah,
that was my first exposure. But there's something about the hero's journey that is just so captivating. And we all kind of expect a hero to not want it, like it's thrust upon you. And so when
like
Aragorn,
shows the goodness of their heart, or like
yeah, like you
that
only
means.
and there's a real quote here that I'm just gonna paraphrase, but it's basically knowing that you're a good leader or that someone's gonna be a good leader is by them not actually wanting the role and then being thrust upon it.
Yeah.
Having it thrust upon them rather. So I really like that part in the movies. I didn't really consider though, what you just said is so interesting. And it's absolutely true. Aragorn could have just walked away from this whole thing and been like, screw it. I'm going to go be king of Gondor and like, I'll get some armies to help you, whatever. But he makes that choice to say, even though I want to be in Gondor, I want to take Anduril and take the throne that is so rightly mine. I'm going to actually just commit Frodo on this journey. Whereas in the movies, obviously, he's still committing his life. I mean, you do get the sense that they all understand very likely you're not going to make it. You're not going to survive this journey. But it's less of him giving up his birthright, which he's acknowledging that he's willing to do if it means that he can help Frodo see this to the
Yeah,
end in the
it could almost
books.
even be seen as like a way out. Like if he were to die on his quest to destroy the ring, then it's just like he gets to undo Isildur's error while also not having to bear the burden of leadership or kingship. Um, yeah, so I don't know. I think that it's an important distinction.
And
I
what you're
think that
saying is,
how the
sorry, in the
books did it.
movies, like in the
Yeah, yeah,
movies,
like in the
he's
movies,
almost,
exactly.
yeah. Okay.
And you get that wonderful scene because you don't get it in the books, but when Frodo decides to leave at the Falls of Forest at Amon or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
um, he gets that final conversation with Aragorn, and Aragorn's like, "I would have followed you to the end or to the very fires." It's beautiful, obviously, but you don't really get that in the books. It's just another one of those little like human moments. They're in the book for sure, and often the best moments, like you mentioned in Moria, in the films, the best like human emotional moments are lines taken directly from the text. But
Absolutely.
it's how they're inserted in it that makes really all the difference. But yeah, so for Aragorn, I don't know. I think both, it's a cop-out answer, but I think both fit their medium. I think that it's
Yeah.
important to have it be this way in the books.
No, I agree. But I mean, Viggo Mortensen did such a good job in the
Yeah.
movies. It's crazy to think it wasn't going to be him initially. They actually had another actor pretty much lined up and like
Mm.
doing practice rounds and everything.
Yeah, the film scenes.
So
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah, but
I
no,
don't even know who it
he
was.
plays it. I looked this up recently and we could even put it in the notes or something,
It's a
just a
no
link to
name.
who the guy used to be. I don't know that he's done much, but it's just interesting because when you take on a role too, you have to kind of make it your own a little bit. Like you don't want to just be the exact embodiment of that character in the book. And sometimes when you're a big fan of the books, that can be so crushing because you're like, no, Aragorn would have never said this or done that.
Yeah.
But I think everyone in Fellowship really does a good job of making that role their own. And I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if as they progressed filming, they even changed some lines, even if just slightly, to better accommodate the actor playing that role in the way that he saw it versus verbatim off the script.
Yeah, I would
But like
totally
you
agree with
said,
that.
like the best moments are fully, this is Tolkien's baby through and through, movie and books. And Peter Jackson does such a good job of respecting that. And the best scenes are fully pulled from pages of the books, even if they're not in the exact placement that they were in the books. They're full lines from the books that are just amazing.
And just to speak on that for a second, because obviously the books get sometimes there's like a joke surrounding it, how Tolkien describes every little blade of grass. And no doubt he's obviously a very descriptive writer, but it's really worth saying that narrative aside, plot aside, character arcs, descriptions, it's the actual word choices, I don't know if that's a word.
Word choices.
But his prose, yeah, there you go. His prose, it's unbelievable. Like it is truly, if not the best, one of the best written books I've ever read. Like just by the prose.
No,
Every word
agree.
is the right word. Sometimes, like oftentimes, especially when I was younger, but even now, I'm looking up words, what they mean, but it doesn't feel like it's pretentious. You know, it's like, no, this is exactly the right word. You could have used any other word that would have got the point across. But like I'm not, I don't want to be hyperbolic when I say that almost every word choice, down to like the most minute one, seems like it was chosen specifically. Like some sentences just flow like it's a piece of poetry. Like it's not rhyme, but just the syllables and the beats and the alliterations, but it never feels like it's overdone. So that's why I don't mind like the descriptive aspects, because it draws you in, but then also you're just kind of, it's like a saga, like an old poem or something.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. Like the way that he has so thoughtfully chosen every word. And, you know, this does even boil down to some of those descriptions that can, even to the most ardent fan, feel pretty long, not long-winded, but lengthy, where you're just like, okay, I'm ready to get to some of the action. It's all well thought out. I mean, he took years and years to write this. So
Yeah, like
I'm sure he did rewrite several times, you know, to get those exact right words. But it is some of the most beautiful writing I've certainly ever read. And I mean, I'm not going to profess to have read every amazing literary book out there, but it's amazing. And it draws you right in. I cannot stop reading it. I've been burning through the books in this most recent reread because I can't stop. I'll like book my calendar so it looks like I'm in a meeting, and I've just spent an hour reading Lord of the Rings. Like I've been falling asleep with it, just like lying beside me. It's just really compelling, and it's really hard to get out of. And so that's why it's such an amazing material source for anyone that wants to create content around it, that you know, it just lends itself so well to inspiring other works. And you know, let's not even talk about Rings of Power, because I know we have feelings, but the Lord of the Rings and the Fellowship specifically had this source material to create something epic on screen too. And so that's why we keep going back to this. Some of those best quotes, arguably all best quotes,
I mean,
are directly from the book.
Sorry, the whole fantasy genre is you basically owe it to Tolkien. I mean, like Dungeons and Dragons, it's just like the idea of a ranger, like or elves being tall. Like you know, I don't know all of the I know like dwarves and elves obviously existed in folklore and mythologies, but how we perceive them, it's all Tolkien. So no, and you're absolutely right how you just do get sucked in when you're reading it, because the chapters are very long. And oftentimes when I'm reading a book, I will not skip ahead like reading, but I'll flip the pages just to see when the chapter ends, because it's like, okay, I'm going to stop after this chapter.
Right.
But in the Lord of the Rings, even though the chapters are very long, you don't really notice it. Like the Council of Elrond is just a lore dump. But it doesn't feel like it's long in the tooth, but like that's you have to truck through that. But it's incredible. Like you get things that are relevant, but not too much. Like by the time you're halfway through the book, you've forgotten about what's going on with the dwarves, but you get a whole like 30 pages of, you know, Gimli and what happened with Balin on his journey to Moria. It really just sucks you in for content that might seem dry at face value. It's crazy.
I think, you know, I read it on my Kindle, so it will tell me how many hours I have or how many minutes left in a chapter. The Council of Elrond, I think, was just over an hour, and I chewed through it in one sitting. I'm not a speed reader. I read and I retain. But yes, I can read relatively quickly, and I had to finish it. There's no just, I'm going to put this down and stop halfway through this. Like, you are getting so much lore and content that speaks to not just this current journey, but what's so impressive is there's this whole history of Middle Earth, and you get so sucked in that you want to know it. I mean, I feel like I know elements of this history better than my own in some cases, which is so humiliating to admit, but it's just the way he's telling the story. Like, you want to know what's happening. And the Council of Elrond, you know, they have to go through it quickly in the movies, and I totally get it, and I think they do it really well. And I mean, you certainly don't in the books get that amazing moment of, you have my sword and my axe and my bow. I totally messed up the order there, but you know, the movies have that gravitas to it, but in the books, like, that moment is, and then, you know, we're talking about Council of Elrond, which leads me into a key character that kicks off the books that we haven't talked much about, but Bilbo. He has such a larger role in the books. Again, I totally understand the decision to not have him quite as prevalent in the movies. It's not Bilbo's story anymore. But one of the moments that just like hit me in the heart in the books is when Elrond is explaining kind of how this journey needs to happen. They go through every option. Can we hide it? Can we use it? They even talk about that. Can we literally throw it away? And it boils down to, no, we can't. We have to take it to Mordor. We might not even get there. We probably won't get there, but we have to try to take it to Mount Doom. And Bilbo stands up and is like, all right, I hear what you're saying, Elrond. Give it to me. Like, I started this mess. I'll finish what I started. And I think in the books, Boromir like kind of smiles or, you know, kind of laughs and then just stops, and he realizes that everyone around him is dead serious. They fully understand the respect for Bilbo because he would have done it 100%, even though he's like 120 plus at this point. Oh my God. Like, I have chills just talking about that moment.
Yeah, that is a beautiful moment. Because like you're right, he notices like the reverence that everyone has. And like, these are like some of the most, I mean, at that time in the Third Age, like some of the most powerful beings that are all amassed. No, that's a wonderful point, because you know, The Hobbit is also just an incredible book. If someone's not read it, they absolutely should. It does not take long to read. And it reads differently, but Bilbo is an incredible character, and you do get more of, and like his more poetic side comes out. Like, he sings a bit in the films, but you know, like that poem, Aragorn's poem written by Bilbo, and I'm glad that they kind of linger in Rivendell, and like in the song, what is it, the Halls of Song or something like that in Rivendell, when he's coming up with his lines about Elendil. And I'm glad that Tolkien gave like a proper send off, but recognition to Bilbo, because he's a great character.
And he started the journey, because you're absolutely right. Like, The Hobbit is, I guess, the prequel that isn't necessary, but I mean, it's a great book. It's a relatively easy read. And yeah, I mean, it starts with Bilbo, and it ends with Frodo, but via extension of Bilbo only. And he does have that. It's almost like Tolkien injected his own love of words and language into Bilbo, because he creates so many songs, and that Songs of Hall moment in Rivendell is so beautiful. It's really cool to see Bilbo's coming up with a song, and Elrond's like, great, we're going to hear it, so get to it.
Him and Aragorn go off to the little corner
and start creating it.
The Dunedain.
So
I mean, okay, so that Rivendell is where the Fellowship forms. Do you have a favorite member of the Fellowship?
That is sick. That is like asking, who is your favorite child? Not that I have children, but I would imagine that would be a tough thing to answer.
No, this is tough.
I am actually I did not come up with this concept, but I have seen people say before, you can't have a favorite member of the Fellowship because they are all their best selves in the Fellowship. That said, yeah, of course, I obviously do. It's hard. I don't want to. Okay, so Sam Gamgee is my probable favorite, but I do think the heartstrings. Absolutely. And movies, I loved Aragorn because, you know, I was just enchanted by him, especially when I was young, and he just does the role so well. But Sam is the heart, absolutely, of the whole Fellowship. That said, look, I'm not a a Frodo diehard fan, but I think he gets a lot of hate. And without Frodo, none of this is
Yeah, he does.
happening. Like there's
No,
a
I agree.
lot of Frodo hate out there, and I do not subscribe to it. He
Especially from
is
the movies.
a
He's a better
stud.
character in the books, but even like I agree, he gets too much. Like he isn't like no one else. Tolkien literally says no one else could have bore the burden.
No, not even another Hobbit, you know? So I do think there's too much Frodo hate out there. So I want to stand up for my man Frodo and say that he is a key character. But yeah, if you're going to put me on the spot and force me, then I'm going to have to say my man Samwise is my favorite.
Okay.
Who's yours?
Okay, I actually didn't think that you were going to say that. I thought you were going
Well,
to take
movies
my
are very
answer once
different, but
more. The movies
who
are
are,
different,
I think I
but
know your answer.
my mind goes for both the movies and the books, but it's
If you
Gandalf.
say Boromir, oh, I thought you were
No,
going to
no,
say
no. I
Boromir.
love Boromir. I mean, I love Boromir, and I'm glad
Same.
that there's been, even though there's, like you mentioned, there's a lot of Frodo hate, there's been a resurgence in love for Boromir over the last few years, which is
Yeah.
more than well deserved. Because him and Theoden, I think Theoden more so because you get more time with him, are probably the most complex characters. Maybe Gollum, Smeagol, but
Interesting
I
thought.
think it's got to be Gandalf. But I love both
Okay.
versions, but also
Fair.
Gandalf the Grey in particular. Um, I don't know. There's just something really comforting about the old wizened, uh, you know,
The
leader
wisdom
or
and
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And it's just like I love his. I think I don't know if maybe it's in the preface or somewhere. He's described as like quick to anger and quick to laugh, or and like quicker to laughter or something along those lines, which I think sums up the. It's like I don't know. Every time that Gandalf says something, I'm immediately invested in what's happening. Like,
No, that's true.
he's just yeah, he's got like a strength to him. I love the idea of like this all-powerful angel essentially being confined to like this like little old body. And
Well, he is
I
very
also
tall.
yeah, that's true, especially when he's angry and he raises himself to his full height. And I love how both Tolkien and the movies uh don't show a lot of magic. And it's not that because like magic is not there. I think that it just makes it all the more impressive. Like in the movies, you really only see Gandalf stop the Balrog. I mean, he's fireworks, but you know, in the books, I think he actually gets a little more because there's the scene which is not in the movies before they go to either Caradhras or I think it's after they come down the mountain, but it's when they fight off the werewolves or wargs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like Gandalf, he does something like the Hobbit, you know, where he gets the fireballs going. He
Yeah.
makes a ring of
But
fire.
even when he does that, there's one point where they're on Caradhras where they actually stay significantly longer in the books. Like it's at least a day, or they have to spend a night
Yeah.
in the snowy mountains. And somebody suggests, make a fire, Gandalf. And he's like, I can't make fire out of nothing. Like, you got to give me something, a source. And it's interesting because it almost implies that a lot of Gandalf's magic and strength comes from the source, which is nature or Middle Earth itself. And he can't just make something out of nothing. And, he's not just, he doesn't have, I mean, yes, he has a staff, but he doesn't have this magic wand that is able to harness any energy and just create magic. Like
Yeah,
it
he
is
has
a
this
lot
conjure
more.
thing. Now he does,
Yeah.
but he does actually make the fire on the mountain, and he's mad because they bring up bundles of wood. I think it's per Boromir's request, but then he says, "Well, whatever hope of secrecy, like I've just essentially
That's
just
right.
said, Gandalf is here."
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
but in Moria, with the fight with the Balrog, when they're in Balin's tomb, I think in Tolkien calls them like not like spells of command or words of command or something, but he uses it to like hold the door. He uses a bit more magic in the books, but it's
Yeah.
still always very subtle. And like you said, it's like it just draws from like the source of life, like the song of the music of the Aino or something. Um, but it makes Gandalf just also like a more intimidating character because you always know that there's way more than meets the eye with him, and he's there like I mean you can see this in his love for the hobbits, but he's the best kind of leader where he will forthrightly say what he thinks and he will lead people into danger, but he doesn't just make things easy, even if he
Yeah.
in theory could, because he knows that if the peoples of Middle Earth are going to make it, they have to realize their own strength. So it's like
Yeah.
he can bring them together, but he's not just going to like eradicate all the orcs in Moria. Anyway, so tangent, but I love Gandalf.
I mean, no, that's totally fair. He is a fabulous character, obviously. And yeah, I mean, he's perfect in the books and then perfect in the movies too,
Yeah.
in
Ian
terms
McKellen
of,
does an
oh my
incredible job.
God. Oh, he's so good. I don't know how he gets the twinkle in his eye. Like, was that
Yeah,
a digital
exactly.
addition? Is that just that man? But absolutely, like, you just want to trust him and believe everything he has to say. And the way that everyone is so shaken when he does fall in Moria. And I mean, it is so clear at that moment, again, in the movies, the music and the hobbits just crying and Aragorn, we got to get out of here. But exactly, there's our man Boromir. Like, Boromir has such a heart, and he does just, he understands that the hobbits are in mourning, and Aragorn, ever the leader, by nightfall these hills will be swarming with orcs and we got to get out of here. But there's something more to it in the books, where there's so many different times Aragorn has to make a decision, and he's like, I'm not necessarily prepared to lead this. Yeah, and so his loss is felt so keenly throughout the whole fellowship once he is gone. I mean, in both books and movies, but in the books, you can really see how they relied on him so much for that wisdom and guidance.
Yeah, it's also an important, maybe not an important difference, but it is a difference between the books and the movies. Is in the books, it's Aragorn who wants to go over the mountain, and it's Gandalf who wants to go through Moria.
That's right. That's right. And
yeah.
Sorry, no, say what you were going to say.
No, that was it.
Well, that's so interesting, because I completely forgot that I wanted to bring this up. Aragorn has a little bit of foresight ability, and he gives this, and that's right. So he wants to keep going through Caradhras. Gandalf is like, we've got to go through the mines, and Aragorn kind of gives him this prophetic warning, and it's like, if you go through the mines, like, beware all I say to you, and if you still want to go, let's go. But it's really interesting, because I mean, Gandalf is prepared to face his fate, and they do kind of tease that in the movies, where Saruman's voiceover is kind of speaking like, the dwarves delve too deeply, what awaits, but you don't get the sense that fate is specific to Gandalf, whereas in the books they do hint that, like, Moria is the end for Gandalf, not necessarily for the rest of them, and he still makes that decision because it's very greater good, which reminds me of Dumbledore a little bit, because there are some similarities between them, but obviously Gandalf being the OG, and probably, whether consciously or no, I'm sure there's a debate there, heavily influenced many other characters, Dumbledore included. But that greater good is totally Obi-Wan. Yeah, just the old sage who is, prepared to see people through to the end, even if it means their end.
Yeah, exactly. So Gandalf is goated. Without Gandalf, there'd be nothing.
Okay, fair. Well, even though he's not, I can't believe neither of us called him our favorite. And I mean, it doesn't make sense for Boromir to be a favorite when you think of some of these people, but I have such a soft spot for Boromir. I just love him. In the movies, he's so great, but in the books, he is just as impactful. I love him. And I almost feel like he's weirdly relatable. I mean, he's this huge, strong man that, like, but you see it through his lens sometimes, like that Bilbo moment when he, at the Council of Elrond, when he kind of finds this funny, like, who is this little halfling that's actually saying he's going to do what none of us can do, and then realizes everyone else is totally conscious and understanding that Bilbo could probably be capable and would do it. You just kind of see the whole story through Boromir's eyes sometimes, and he's just like a really relatable yet still powerful character. And I love that about him. And I know that he has his weak moment with the ring, but sometimes I get the sense that people really hold that against him, but you have to understand that anyone is going to be weak with the ring. I mean,
no, they all would have fallen. That's why Frodo has to leave. Every single one of them.
Absolutely. And maybe none of them specifically tried to take it from Frodo, but I think that Boromir had the most to gain from taking the ring out of anyone. Like, what is Legolas going to do with this ring? Even Aragorn already knows what his fate is. But Boromir is so much more connected with the people of Gondor. He's grown up with them. He's led them for so long. And also Aragorn has a lot of wisdom too. I mean, he's 87. He understands the gravity
of Numenor in him. Like, I know, like, Boromir does as well, but to a much lesser degree.
But I think my point is that Aragorn understands that the ring can't be used. Boromir doesn't really get that yet. He shows up at a council. He's like, we've got the weapon of the enemy. Like, what? We can't just use it. And he wants to defend his people. And I just totally get it. I get where Boromir is coming from. And I'm certainly glad he doesn't get the ring. Would have obviously been his downfall. And, Frodo, I'm a big Boromir fan. I'm a Boromir apologist. And yeah, I just think he is a stud of a character, and he has to be mentioned as, you know, a top tier fellowship character. But at this point, we could go through all of them and explain why they are fabulous. And that does bring me back to the cop-out answer. You cannot have a favorite fellowship character because they all bring out the best in each other, and
and
they're
they all
all
serve a very
essential
real
elements.
purpose. And like some, especially in the movies, but some less than others. Gimli, most of all, who in the books is a way better character. Like I love Gimli in the films, and what's the actor's name? John Rhys Davies or something. An incredible job at portraying Gimli, but he's essentially only comic relief in the movies. Then it's fine. I'm glad he's there. Like, of course, like that's needed, but he's a much more serious and thoughtful
yes,
character.
You're right. He's solemn, and again, he has that kind of ancient feeling to him that is really hard to replicate in a movie. Like he has such a past with his own people, and there's a lot of, you know, devastation in that past for the dwarves. And he is very solemn and very stoic. Like he is always willing to pull his axe up and, you know, hew down any enemies. And even though they reference that in the movies, it is always a little funnier, you know? And even some of those lines are taken right from the books, but they still don't seem as comedic. Like when the elves in Lothlorien say, you know, the dwarf breathes so loudly, we could have I mean, they actually do say something kind of like that in the books, but it just doesn't come across as comedic at Gimli's expense. He is a really solemn character that is super stoic. And I mean, again, books and movies, they're both great characters for different reasons, but I do love Gimli. And I think that they do this in the books as well, of course, but in the movies, Gimli is almost used a little more to showcase the huge disconnect between dwarves and elves, even though they used to have such a close relationship. And then as he gets closer to Legolas, like that's a huge almost character arc for him.
The arc. That is the arc for both the characters, because they don't really progress the plot outside of that. I mean, they're key members of the Fellowship, but they don't perform any role that's, in my mind anyways, like greater than that. And so outside of like the bond.
How dare you? If it wasn't for them, I actually
but you know what I
think
mean.
of much.
Like, yeah. But it's still important, and you're right, because it gives more of like the history and it gives context to maybe some of the enmity between like the peoples. But I don't know, like you get a bit of it in the extended scenes in Lothlorien, but like his reverence for Galadriel and his just ability to speak, and like you are right, like he's quick-witted in the books as well, and the dialogue, like he's also, I would say Merry and Pippin are probably more comedic in the books than Gimli, but he still has like it's just like an ironic sense of humor, because like he's always axe ready, but you believe it. It's just like he's not just saying, it's like he would sever heads.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But it's not that the movies didn't do him justice, but at some point, I don't know, like I just think that he could have had a little more time. Same with Legolas.
Well, I also think fair. I think that the kind of solemn, they all kind of had to fit into different roles to make this cohesive in the movies.
Yeah, they can't all be like the stoic man.
Yeah, Aragorn took that. Like that's who he was. So they had to create something a little different for the two of them, because even Legolas, like in the books, there just seems to be more gravitas to Legolas. Like he is so ancient. And
he's a little more lighthearted in the books. Like
in like an elvish way.
Agreed. But it's just like a little more whimsical, you know? Like the elves in general are just a little more like, they're deadly serious, but they also have like the capacity for not like jokes, but it just seems like lighthearted, you know?
Right.
I don't know.
Wait, are you saying in the movies or in the books?
I'm saying in the books. I'm saying you get more of the whimsical nature in the books.
Yeah. That's true. Like they're laughing at a lot of things. They're the halls of the Song of Halls and and
they're just like cheerful. Like Legolas is always just cheerful, and sometimes you get the impression not that he doesn't know what's going on, but he doesn't understand like some of the mortal troubles, so to speak.
Well, and I wonder if it's just because he thinks he's a little bit like above it in some way. I mean, he does really care for like he's talking about how, you know, it's in both the movies and the books. I think the extended version of the movies, when they're in Lothlorien and the elves are singing a song in Elvish about Gandalf, and Legolas is like, I don't have the heart to tell you what they're saying. It's like, for me, yeah, exactly. It's too deep. It's too fresh. So yeah, and I think that is a fair point. There is this like whimsical nature to the elves. Also, Legolas, arguably, I mean, I'd have to look into it, but I think he must have the least amount of lines among everyone in the, I mean, maybe Boromir because he's one
Probably.
movie and done, but
Yeah.
he
Sure.
just doesn't have as many opportunities to kind of show who the character is. I mean, there's 9 members of the Fellowship. There's so
Yeah.
much content to get through, but he doesn't have a ton of um opportunities to kind of have a compelling speech or what have you in the
No,
movies
especially in
themselves.
Fellowship. It grow as like Gimli and him become closer, you get more of that, but it's really just between those two. And outside of that, it's like, what do your elf eyes see? Like they do that a lot in Two Towers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he has some great moments in the book. You don't get this in the movies, but when the Nazgul on the Fell Beast is about to do him, then
Oh
Legolas like
yeah.
shoots him in the dark,
Yeah.
and the
One
bullet
shot,
goes.
one and done.
Yeah,
No, Legolas
so he's
is a
obviously very
stud.
important. Um, but yeah, just there are some characters that just stand above.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and it's all personal opinion, but I think that probably a lot of people have similar thoughts. Like some of them do just stand out a little more. I mean, we didn't even talk about Merry and Pippin yet, because they are, to your point earlier, kind of seen as more comic relief in the movies. And
in the
certainly if we
books, I
just
would
keep this
say
to sorry, I no, okay, yes, that's
they
true.
are. I'm not
Compared to
saying
Gimli.
only. They're more serious in the books for sure, especially Mary.
Yeah,
Um, but I'd still say that especially when you get their POV chapters later on,
right.
you just like
Right.
it. The tone immediately changes. Like when you're getting the POV from it's quite cool, but it seems like you're almost reading a book from not a different author, but just a different book. Like it's like you're
Yeah.
back to actually reading The Hobbit. Like things
Well,
just
because
are more lighthearted. Like
he puts himself in their shoes for sure. Although you're totally into Two Towers right now, which is going to have to be a separate
yeah,
conversation
yeah,
because there's so much content. But you're right. There's like a whimsical nature to them too, in a way, or just like a lightheartedness of not taking things to just touch on Two Towers very quickly when they escape from the orcs and they're about to go into Fangorn. Like Merry and Pippin just sit down and eat some lembas
just
bread.
eating.
Like, what? And then Aragorn's tracking them and he's like, oh my, I think
Yeah,
they
it's like
stopped here
clearly
and
this
just
was a
ate.
Hobbit.
It's like, exactly. Like there's no other being that would have done something like this. But no, I think that, like, to your point, so the comedic relief aside, Merry and Pippin, Merry more so, has again like a little more power in the books. Like Merry is really courageous. And I do think that comes out in the movies too, especially in the later ones, not necessarily Fellowship, because they haven't had the time to build out every character yet.
No.
But he's super courageous. They're willing to go with Frodo to the point that all of the hobbits have to kind of trick Frodo into thinking that he's
Mhm.
going to go alone. And they're like, we've known this whole
Grand
time. You're
conspiracy.
not subtle. Yeah. We're Fatty Bulger, RIP in the movies, because he doesn't even I think in the extended scene, he shows up at Bilbo's party. So he gets one call out
Yeah,
in the
maybe.
movies. But definitely not a prominent or essential character. But I just think it's easier when you're in a book to be able to add so much more description to a character's thoughts or why they act the way they do, whereas in the movies you really just see the action. So sometimes Merry and Pippin maybe don't get the glory that they're supposed to in the first movie rather, but as it unfolds, as they take their
Yeah, it
separate
does go on.
paths, they certainly do get that
But it
opportunity.
does come out quite early in the books because when they go to the old forest, like it's Mary who's leading the company.
Yeah,
As
that's
soon
right.
as Mary picks them up from what's his name, Farmer Maggots,
Yeah,
it's Mary who's just like,
he's the clear
here's what we
leader.
should do. Like here's the path we're gonna follow. Here's the
Yeah.
history of the old forest. And that just reminded me when you said Fatty. So there's some names I don't know. See, in my mind, I always said Bulger. Is it Bulger or Bulger?
Oh
Bulger.
my
So I
God.
don't know. And then, but that wasn't even what I wanted to remain on. Don't they also have a pony name? There's Fatty. Is Fatty Lumpkin the pony?
Fatty Lumpkin is the pony. Yes, there
Yeah.
is.
Okay.
Yeah, Fatty
Because
Lumpkin
when
is
because
there.
it's been a few months since I went through fellowship. I was like, no, but there's another character named Fatty, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. No, Fatty
Yeah.
Lumpkin is one of the ponies. So Mary has 5 ponies. He gets them all on ponies. I guess leaves
Right.
one with Fatty. I always say Fatty Bulger. So that's interesting. I
No,
don't
I
know if
don't.
it's
I have no
Bulger or
idea.
Bulger. If someone does know, tell us.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's also when you're reading something, it is up to interpretation. Like read it however you want, in a sense of names like that. Like I don't think it
Yeah.
truly matters, but
Yeah,
it would be
it's not.
interesting to
But
know
Tolkien
what it was
like does
intended.
give like I don't know if it's in the preface or the appendices. He does have like a very thorough like I don't know what the word would be, but how to pronounce like things in his
Yeah,
alphabet.
yeah.
Um,
No, that's fair. Well, we should look into
I'll have to
that.
go to the appendices when we get
But
to
to the
Return
point
King.
of Fatty Lumpkin, they go to Bree and they stay at the inn of the Prancing Pony, and then
It's the Nazgul
that guy
family.
Bill is working with the Nazgul.
Right.
He's like in
That's
league
right.
with them,
Bill
and so he
Ferny.
kind of tips them off, and they all of the ponies end up running away. So I mean, at the end, and again, it's been a while since I've gotten through Return of the King. I'm only midway through Two Towers book wise right now, so I don't know if we ever hear what happened to Fatty Lumpkin. I
It
like to
goes
think
back
they
to
just
Tom
ran off to
Bombadil, I'm
Tom.
pretty
That's
sure.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but because of that,
Everything
they
goes
get
back to
that they buy
Tom.
that one pony from Bill Ferny that's like emaciated and terrible, and that ends up becoming
Yeah.
the classic icon, Bill the Pony.
Goodbye, Bill.
Um, yeah, oh yeah, and that moment in the books is crushing when
Yeah,
Sam
Sam's
is like,
sobbing.
oh, and then when Bill runs and he like tries to grab the reins back, like he's not ready to say goodbye, but Gandalf's like, we just can't take this horse through the mines. And again, in the extended versions of the movies, they do have a shout out where Aragorn's
Yeah, they
like,
have the
Bill
show.
just can't make it through the mines, but that's really his only cameo. It's interesting. Yeah, there are just so many characters. I mean, it's an entire world in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly. Like Glorfindel instead of Arwen, um, and you
Well,
just
I'm
get
glad
I
that
don't know who
Arwen
else is
gets
in.
some FaceTime in the movies, because my
Yeah,
God,
it's better
she
story.
doesn't even have a line. I mean, it's just, and
No, she
you
might
know,
not.
it wasn't the point. This kind of romantic sidebar of Aragorn's was certainly not a focal point of the books when Tolkien was writing them, but they get a lot of time in the appendices, at least, of how
Yeah, you
they
get
end
more.
up
That's where the
together. And
backstory is.
yeah, and it was just, I thought it was really nice to see her story. And I mean, as a woman loving Lord of the Rings, it's nice to see a couple female characters here. Like, my God, I mean, it doesn't have to be
Anyone's okay.
revolutionary, but no, she's beautiful, and she is such a beautiful embodiment of elves. Her and
Mhm.
Galadriel. I mean, oh my
Yeah, yeah.
God,
Like,
they
you mean the
just,
characters, specifically the actresses?
well, I think I guess I'm saying the actresses, because the
Yeah.
way that they
No,
create
I
it
agree.
on film is like, you just believe that they are not humans. This is a different entity, and they both of those actors do it so. I mean, Liv Tyler is gorgeous, but beyond that, she's ethereal in these movies, and it's
Agreed.
just
That's one thing
captivating.
where, not to harp on Rings of Power, as easy as it is to do. The moment when Frodo gets stabbed and he sees Arwen as like this luminous being, and everyone else
Yeah,
just sees her like I think that's such a fantastic introduction into an elf. But in like the Rings of Power, it's like you don't get that at all. Like you don't get
no,
the idea that they are just some like ethereal thing.
yeah,
But
like
but more,
otherworldly.
I agree. Arwen, what's her name? Liv Tyler, great.
Yeah,
Uh, I agree. I think it was a better choice to put her in, and I think she does the job really well. But Kate Blanchett as Galadriel is
yeah,
like the archetypal elf in my mind. Like,
agreed.
so like that's how, like, in the books, maybe I picture her a little younger, maybe like hair a little longer, but like Kate Blanchett just has that like ageless look in the
Totally
good way.
timeless, like
Yeah, timeless.
timeless.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
exactly. Like
really
she looks both
stunning.
like I believe as a
And her
in this
voice,
world that she's thousands of years old, you know, like
no, absolutely. Kate Blanchett is just, she just is Galadriel existing in our world. We're just so lucky
and
to
like her
have
movements,
her.
and like when they're at the mirror and she just like gives Frodo like the side eye. It's so good.
Mhm.
But that's also
Her,
in the books. I love that. I love that part as well. And Sam gets to be there for it too. And you got to
and
give
have
it
his own
to see
vision.
Sam's like the goodness of Sam's heart in it. Um, but those are beautiful moments, like the gift giving, the gifts of Galadriel, and
Yeah.
just all the time spent with her character. Like it's like we were saying at the beginning, it's like the Tom thing, where you just get this idea that it's not in a cheesy way, but there's like a prevailing spirit
Yeah.
in Tolkien's world. And I think that it's, in our world, this is like something that he's just trying to put to words. Um, that is just it's so hard to capture, because elves are in like everything fantasy now, and they
For
rip off
sure.
Tolkien and whatnot, but nothing comes close, whether it be from the films or the books, that kind of can capture like the majesty of what Galadriel is, anyways.
No, you're right. And Peter Jackson did such a good job, and the casting of it was 10 out, I don't know who the casting director was, but 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
And she, like, the voice that she uses, the way she looks, the way she acts, the way she moves. And I think that's why a lot of us give Rings of Power such a hard time, is because you're playing in the same like sandbox of characters and story and narrative, all crafted by Tolkien, and you're not delivering to me on the same level that I've already
Um,
seen. And so they're
It's
already
like a
at a
lack of
disadvantage.
reverence or something, but it's
Yeah.
just it it's subtle choices, like you said, like with the casting or whatever it may be. But I feel like you could have taken the exact same script, as flawed as it is from Rings of Power, but like
And it
that's
is
not even
flawed.
why it just doesn't like there's just something that's missing. But I don't want to dwell on that just because I could go all day
No,
on
I
its
know. And I
faults.
don't want to, knock content here. I mean, A for effort, right? But certainly doesn't
I'm
hold a
glad it
lot of weight with
exists. And
me.
there's yeah.
I watched it all. Like, I'm not gonna
Yeah,
lie,
yeah,
and I'm gonna watch the next season and whatever. But yeah, I mean, it just doesn't even hold a candle to the OG content of the books and these initial Peter Jackson movies. And so, I think the elves do play a major role in why it doesn't feel that same kind of magic that just sucks you right in. But regardless, the main point being that the elves in the books and in the movies, in Peter Jackson's movies, are just such a magical creation. And I mean, Elrond, there are a lot of other amazing elves, and Legolas, of course, but beyond just Arwen and Galadriel. But the
Oh
two
yeah,
of them
yeah.
bring this like femininity to it that is just, but it's not femininity. It's like it
No,
transcends that. It's just
no, yeah,
like
I would say it
magic.
is femininity, but it is like in its most like primal form, like and not in like femininity woman, but like if you have a masculine both equally obviously very important and needed. I
Yeah.
think the elves do capture that femininity, which is like you know, a beautiful thing, and there's a real deep strength into it. Like Galadriel is probably the most powerful being, maybe aside from Gandalf the White
For
in
sure.
Middle Earth.
And then there are
Um,
elves that have that, like, kind of, they portray a bit of masculinity in a way, not in
yeah,
everything
like
they do, but in
Glorfindel, but
certain
they're still
moments.
very not eccentric, or they're, you just get this like regal sense. It's not like a rough and shoddy like muscle man, like
Yeah.
Boromir or Aragorn is a masculine archetype. I think the elves are the more feminine, but the juxtaposition is what kind of brings out the strength of both,
Right.
because Tolkien does a great job at playing both of them.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, you can really tell that he's what I appreciate about The Lord of the Rings is that it's not on the nose and it never feels like there's a message that's being kind of downloaded, but you can still really get, at least I would think anyways, a good understanding of Tolkien's own worldview. And I mean, even
To
like,
some
but like he
degree.
was obviously like a devout Catholic. The religious motifs are there, but they're not on your nose. Like they're once you recognize them, they're there, but it's
And
not
you
on the
don't
nose.
Right. And you don't necessarily have to accept them to
No.
enjoy the plot. Like, you don't even have to be aware of them, but it is interesting to see what has consciously guided and directed him because,
Yeah, you don't have to
whether
be
you
a
subscribe
yeah.
to Catholicism or any religion or whatever, it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't feel on the nose, but you don't even have to appreciate that side of it to appreciate the content, which is really nice. Like, there are I know he was a good friend of C.S. Lewis. And when you read the Narnia series, like, whoa, man, it's
Yeah,
pretty
that is
on the
just an allegory.
nose.
Like it's just an
Yeah.
allegory. No,
Whereas
but
he
that
has
is
been
the
influenced
thing.
by it, but it's not, you don't
No,
need to
you
take it
get like
away as
you
the
appreciate
reader.
you're not consciously aware of it. And I certainly wasn't when I was growing up and reading them for the first time. But I think you just don't realize why you appreciate it, if that makes sense. Like there's just he has an ability to root it in like more fundamental terms. Like I said, like if he's not trying to, it's not an allegory. He's not being like, this is the war, or this is how I want to represent religion. It has not, and that's what I think the strength of the books are. Like you said, you don't have to. It's not like you have to subscribe to an ideology to appreciate the Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings, but
Mm-hmm.
it's the fact that he's able to have a foundation that he builds off of, and still
Yeah.
remains not like telling you. So he's just telling a story. Um, and I think that's why they're timeless, because the
Yeah.
characters are time, like the struggles of like you mentioned, like the humanity of Boromir. Like, yeah, like I think that's why people love him, because he's the most human character in a real sense.
For sure.
Um,
For sure.
yeah,
And you're right. Like, this foundation is what influenced Tolkien, and it will have an impact on the readers, but it's there's so much of it open to interpretation, and this ability for things to feel so, like, I've used this word many times, but like ethereal or ancient or greater than you or greater than just one entity is something anyone can relate to. Like, we've all had that feeling that there is a greater purpose than just one individual. And it's just really cool how he brings it. He leads you to that kind of sense of thinking and interpretation, but how you interpret it is totally up to the reader or the watcher in the case of the movies.
Because he just says like,
I
oh,
really
they're
appreciate
like
that.
there are other forces at work, but that's not like an on the nose like I'm telling you something. It's a very believable way. But then in the Counts of Elrond, he might be like, oftentimes in like, I don't know the exact verbatim quote, but it's like in times of great peril, it's like the small who have to do the who have to do the work, essentially, where it's just like, and I think Galadriel in the movies, it's like even the smallest person can change the course. Like that is like the themes in it are timeless. And like you said, I think every culture and every background and person could appreciate like just like the human elements to the story. And that is why I think overall, I don't know, I won't say yet as to the books, but I think Fellowship for a while now has been my favorite of the films. And it's because you just get more of that like innocence. Like you get the Shire, you get not a bad, you get like Moria a bit, so you see some combat. But I think it is the best microcosm of the larger story. So I love the Fellowship movie. Like I think like they're all that you can't. It's almost impossible to separate them. But I don't know. Fellowship of the Ring is fantastic.
No, it's a fair point. But that is, I mean, something many people have said is that the books and then de facto the movies are erroneously called a trilogy when in fact it is one single book and one single story. And I mean, you can have your favorite elements of that, but it can't be seen as like a one and done book or movie. It is a full story that you have to experience in its entirety. But no, it's an interesting point. I mean, for a long time, Two Towers was actually my favorite because I love Rohan and the Rohirrim and all of that. But it's like, again, it's like picking a favorite child and I don't think I can do it.
It's impossibly hard, but there's something about Fellowship that just feels, in my mind anyways, between, again, because it's been a while since I've read the book, so going through is refreshing. But for the films, it seems like there's more in common between the Two Towers and the Return of the King. Like Fellowship seems like it's the most different. And not that different inherently means better, but it's just the start with the Shire, I don't know, or the introduction to the characters. Right. It has this like innocent spirit to it.
No, that's fair. And they don't fully know what they're getting into. Yeah. No, you're along for the ride and it's the first exposure for foray into the entire adventure. So no, I think I totally see where you're coming from. But, I think we're well past our hour mark at this point. We got through a ton of content, which is really cool. I feel like we've pretty much talked about the key points of Fellowship that I'd certainly want to get across. I think we can constantly, as we're talking through some of the other books and movies, we'll reference back and forth. Like we were all over the place here, really referencing a lot of Two Towers.
How did we not speak about this? Or how did we miss this difference?
Yeah. But no, I think in our next one, we should definitely focus on just continuing through the story, talking about Two Towers, talking about the books and movies there. And then if anything comes to us or, a piece of Fellowship that we want to speak to, we can certainly bring that conversation forward. But I'm so excited to get into Two Towers because we've already teased out a couple of, our favorite moments, and I get to talk about Boromir's death all over again. Which
exactly, because technically that's in the Two Towers. No, right. I'm excited too because I think we're both near about the halfway point, so we'll be done soon. Because Two Towers
through
is
the
great.
books,
and I'm really enjoying it. I love the novelization.
And it's nice to be able to talk to you about this stuff again. I mean, we always do this when we're in person, but these days it seems like that's usually Christmas time only. So it gives us a chance to really dive in and nerd out together. So I love it.
No, it's always great. So I'm happy that we're able to do this. Hopefully it's enjoyable to be on the outside, but even if not, there's a sincerity in the conversation, which, always a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into Two Towers next and check it all out then. So thanks for anyone listening. And can't wait to do more of these.
Awesome. All right. See you, Katie.
Bye.